What's up, guys? Hope you all had a decent Christmas and New Year's and all that good stuff. I'd tell you what all I got, but I'm pretty sure you don't really give a damn, and I honestly don't really care to tell you. So we can skip that part. Now, then, today I want to talk about old school gaming and new school gaming. And when you think about these two different concepts of gaming, one word is often brought up to describe people's reasoning for playing old school games. No, it's not fanboy, it's nostalgia. When it comes to gaming, nostalgia can work in two different ways. It can play a positive role by bringing back good memories of gaming taking part in the good old days, and it can also play a negative role by preventing us from liking anything new due to our devotion of the positive events from the good old days. But what happens when we let nostalgia prevent us from being able to enjoy anything new no matter what, instead of trying out new stuff and keeping an open mind? Well, we pretty much limit ourselves to the exact same thing over and over again. But, in spite of all that, what does it mean when nostalgia doesn't play the role in preventing us from being able to enjoy new things at all, but instead the new content simply lacks the ability to hold our attention long enough to get us to really enjoy it? In other words, what happens when the new content just flat out sucks? This is something that's been on my mind ever since the dawn of this gaming generation and the new generation console wars. Every generation there was always games that weren't quite as good as we expected them to be, or they were just downright terrible. But something about this generation just doesn't seem right. We're now in a generation that involves more defending of hardware than the enjoyment of software. And when you see this pattern happen over and over again year after year, well, it tends to make you wonder. And it's made me wonder one thing. Could it possibly be that the reasoning behind this gen's so-called console war has less to do with nostalgia and console loyalty and more to do with games just not really being as fun as they once were? That's a pretty tough question to answer, since I'm pretty sure that when you guys hear my answers that A, some of you will completely disagree with me, and B, those of you that may agree with me will agree with me for completely different reasons. Personally, I feel that a lot of games this generation aren't really as fun as they used to be. But why? At first I thought it was due to my own nostalgia with the fun I had with the older consoles. When I thought that, I figured maybe I was being a little too hard on these new games and should probably just try and give them a chance. But now, I'm starting to think that isn't the case at all. As you know, back in the day, we all played games for one main reason. They were fun. Not because we wanted to show the world why our console was better, as we were smart enough to know that there was a pretty good chance that the world just flat out didn't give a shit. And we were smart enough to stay away from ignorant excuses for why people played one console, like that pathetic, idiotic term used for why so many people refuse to play other consoles today: console loyalty. Yeah, we may have gotten into an argument at school with our friends telling them why we thought the SNES was better than the Sega or why the PlayStation was better than the N64. But once we got home, none of that crap mattered and it was back to gaming we went. It almost sounds like we were more intelligent on the subject matter back then, or it could have been because there was simply no YouTube. Something as idiotic as console loyalty, however, probably would have gotten you locked up in a damn insane asylum because of how stupid that sounds. Seriously, just say that to yourself once. Console loyalty. Yeah. But sadly now, console loyalty seems to be a relevant argument in liking a specific console. For those of you who are losing faith in humanity, I'm right behind you. Now, the one sad thing about this gaming generation is that it's brought in a lot of people that haven't really been gaming all that long, and because of this, end up with a one-track mind playing only one type of genre. You already know what that genre is, so I don't have to say it. The sad thing about this, though, is that this generation has even changed some of the old school gamers into the whole if you can't beat 'em, join 'em mentality. So they too end up getting sucked into this whole shooters or nothing generation. Now the question is, what caused a lot of gamers to turn out the way they are now? Easy answer, yada yada, insert random fanboy line here, yada yada. Hard answer, well, for me, there's more than one. I'm going to start with what I feel is one of the easiest answers, something I lightly covered in my Wii Hardcore Casual video. This is social status. To this day, we still have people basing their social status, aka how cool they think they are, on the type of games they play. If you play shooters, you're cool. If you play something like, say, Mario Galaxy, you're a kid. As we know, there's people out there that instead of making their own decisions will go based on what others say. This means if they see a video or hear someone say that people who play the Wii are little kids, then they're too afraid to play one, or at least admit they do, because they're too afraid of what other random people might think. So for them it feels safer to go buy an Xbox 360 or PS3 and then make sure to tell everyone that they got it in hopes that they're accepted in today's gaming society as part of the cool club. When people follow this pattern, this makes it harder for any other types of games to get sold because developers end up being too afraid to try anything different than this generation's norm, since anything that doesn't involve you running around and shooting gets a bad title from majority of these types of gamers as casual or kiddie, or any other idiotic words they can think of in order to show that they are just as cool as the others who share the same opinion. So this pretty much means if we ever expect a new genre to take over either this gen or the next, we have to get people to stop seeing something like shooters as cool and start seeing it for what it really is, the same game in a different box. But I don't think that's possible as long as no other gaming genre can pull these people away from shooters. So instead of other games that don't involve shooting being seen as not much fun, they're seen more as kiddie. So when it comes to playing games for social status instead of for fun, sadly, new school is seen as better than old school. And that's a pretty pathetic reason, but also explains what's keeping this sad, pathetic excuse of a gaming generation going. And this brings me to my next reason. Shooters. Shooters are seen as the best genre of this generation. And the main thing that makes a shooter is, of course, guns. I understand that there will be a lot of people that enjoy playing shooters and there's nothing that can change that. But when games start trying to base their gameplay style on either the same or close to the same concept of shooters, a lot of games end up having no real originality. It doesn't matter if it's first person or third person, a shooter is a shooter. In this generation, the shooter genre is bleeding its way into other genres just so developers can feel safer about bringing in a new game that doesn't follow the same rules of shooters. And that, guys, is the developer's secret to making games in the shooter generation. By simply making a bunch of shooters, but disguising them as a different type of game by giving them a false genre title of adventure or RPG in order to trick people who aren't shooter fans into buying the game because they feel they're getting something different, only to be disappointed later when they realize that they're playing the exact same type of game genre they were trying to get away from. Say what you will, guys, but a third-person shooter RPG? Bullshit. And when you have to put a gun into a game just to get people to buy it, you have a problem. There's another thing that I think makes new school games not as fun, and it's something that I strongly believe and may be the only person that does. Stories in games. Now at this point you might be thinking, what the hell? But hear me out on this one. Now even in the past, the majority of games had some type of story in some way, shape, or form. Even during the NES days, this was no exception. But what made the story work so well is it wasn't the main reason to play the game. During the NES days, people, including myself, would constantly hit buttons to skip through the story of the games we played, mainly because back then a story was nothing more than a bunch of words you really didn't care to read. Reading was for school. You wanted to play a game. Don't get me wrong, like I said, there's nothing wrong with a story in a game as long as the story isn't the main reason to play. And I think that alone is another one of the main reasons why games aren't as fun anymore. Too many developers want to tell a story more than they want to make a game. And when you do that, the gameplay of a lot of games can come off as boring and repetitive when you've only played it a day or so. You end up having the story overshadow the gameplay. This simply turns this into a win-lose situation. If the story is good, but the gameplay is boring, then playing the game becomes more of a chore, and the story is the allowance for completing said chore. This is why RPGs never really have that problem. For starters, RPGs are their own genre, so if a person likes RPGs, they won't mind the story because by now we all know how RPGs work. But even in an RPG, the story never overshadows the game. It's a prize for a prize. The gameplay rewards you a story, and the story rewards you more gameplay. However, I believe when a game is not an RPG, too much story over gameplay can ruin the game. One way it can ruin it is by preventing the player from ever wanting to play the game again. Since you already know the story, and the gameplay was repetitive, Why bother with the game again? You only played it for the story and not the gameplay. Games this generation suffer a lot from this, especially when they have no online features. And I'm sorry guys, but trophies alone aren't enough to make up for this. When you take a game like Mario Galaxy, nobody gave a damn about how Bowser was going to kidnap Peach this time because they just wanted to play the game. A lot of people would complain about how Mario games lack story, but Nintendo knows never to make the mistake of giving Mario a long drawn out story because they know people wouldn't care. Mario was never known for having long drawn out stories because it didn't need it. Games become more fun and give you a reason to continue playing when the story, as I said, doesn't overshadow the gameplay. This is why online is so popular for a lot of games people play, especially shooters, because online involves little to no story at all, and people want to get right to the gameplay without all of the hassle of going through a story they didn't care about to begin with. They keep the story simple and the gameplay fun, and as long as you can do that, you don't have to rely on a long realistic story to hold your audience's attention. The gameplay does it all for you. Realism is another flaw I think a lot of these games have today. The reason I call it a flaw is because it seems a lot of gaming developers don't actually know how to use it properly. There's nothing wrong with it, but you want to be very careful how you use it in a game, because if used the wrong way, realism can have a very bad impact on a game. Realism keeps you in the world you were originally trying to get away from. I don't just mean realism as in graphics, but gameplay physics. And while this doesn't count for all games, remember that the more realistic a game is, the more features there are that can't be implemented into it due to it breaking the laws of physics. In other words, the more realistic you make it, the less of a game it starts to become. Since a lot of games this generation seem to be going for realism, that could be the other reason behind the success of the shooter genre, since physics don't have to play a major role in run and shoot. Looking at Mario Galaxy again, do you have any idea how boring this game would be if it followed the laws of physics? Breaking those laws is what made Mario fun to begin with. You bring in physics and Mario ends up being just another boring, realistic, lackluster game that has you doing the same thing because it would end up just like all the other games that are following the exact same laws. The strange thing about all of this is while all of these companies are trying so hard to make a realistic game that today's gamers will play a little then never touch again, Nintendo seems to be taking a step backwards and making games that have more of an old school feel to them, and people seem to really be enjoying it. Realism can be a dangerous thing to a game that wants to try and bring its audience into a world that it can't hold the player in due to a lack of interest in what the player sees and does. Simply said, realism doesn't work if the physics cause too many limitations for gameplay, resulting in a stale and repetitive game. This is why older games age so well and newer games are already forgotten. If you're going to use realism in a game, fine, but don't forget that in the end, you're still making a game. It seems today that companies haven't necessarily forgotten how to make a game, but simply forgot how to hold the interest in that game. With all of the different reasons for games not being as fun now as they were in the past generations, a lot of gaming companies seem to be going about this in the worst ways possible. Games went from taking years or even the whole generation before they would even be considered old to taking a month or two. These developers are now spending millions to make a game that chances are can't hold our attention span. Yet a lot of us can go back to playing the old games and really enjoy it. Mature seems to be the main thing in these games, but simply end up giving us the same game over and over, but making sure to add anything that this generation gamer would consider cool because they're too idiotic to understand that they're playing the exact same crap with graphic upgrades, blood, swear words, and of course, guns. I don't know about you guys, but for me there really isn't much to offer this generation. A lot of companies are trying so hard to sell games that not too many people are interested in, and now they figure as long as the game involves you running around with a gun, regardless of the genre, then people will like it. And the sad thing is, they're kinda right. It seems a lot of these new school games exist because new school gamers actually like them. And for now, it looks like we're stuck with it. Say what you want about the Nintendo Wii, but it seems to be the only console that isn't following the same path. Nintendo decided to go a different way this gen, and after seeing a lot of the stuff we're getting, I think I'm starting to see why they did that. Oh well, all isn't really lost. There's always next generation.